Listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I, Sneha, on behalf of NEN and Wadhwani Foundation, would like to invite you all for this webinar and also introduce our expert. Ranjit Shastri is a management consultant, entrepreneur, board director, and angel investor. He also serves as a member of the review committee of the IIT Incubator. He has served on the boards of several companies, including that of Alliance Global Services, SmartAnalyst, Design Presentation Associates, and Vickers System India Limited, a subsidiary of Eaton Corporation. Ranjit is also a director of the Stern Fisher Angel Network, a global network of successful entrepreneurs and investors who believe that angel investing needs to be fair, patient, and genuinely supportive of the aspirations of the young entrepreneurs. Mr. Shastri earned an M.B.A. in finance from Wharton School and a B.Sc in applied mathematics from Yale University. He continues to work closely with Yale in expanding its engagement with India. Before I hand over the floor to Ranjit, here are a few reminders to the audience. You will all be on mute. You may ask questions by typing in the panel provided. Over to you, Ranjit.
Okay, thank you very much, Sneha. It's a pleasure to be part of this initiative of NEN. Okay, so I'm just going to the next page, introduction. I think you've already given a very nice introduction, so I'm going to skip a lot of this. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Stern Fisher Angel Network, however. This is a global angel network comprised of CEOs, entrepreneurs, management consultants, and VC/PE professionals. We're currently running the Startup India Funding Challenge. It's supported by CNBC, NEN, of course, the Department of Science and Technology, TIE, and FICCI. And Loc Capital is one of the institutional members. So I'm going to talk to you about the term sheet today, which is really a core element of the what I call the VC entrepreneur game. The reason I call it a game is that wherever you have a set of players, a set of choices that each player can make, a set of rules, and a set of outcomes, you have a game. And that's so this is a game. There are many kinds of games in a business setting. You have, for example, with research and development, you have a classic chicken, the game of chicken game, with the one that shows the most commitment to achieving a goal can kind of scare off the other competitor. So that's a kind of a game. So many kinds of games. Now, in the VC entrepreneur game, I liken it to splitting a pie, which is also a kind of a game. Let's say you have two individuals who come together, each with a set of ingredients to make a pie. And they make this pie, and at the end of the process, it comes, they come to a point where they need to split the pie between themselves. And there's a couple of ways to do this. There's a zero-sum approach, and there's a non-zero-sum approach. Now, if you recall, what is a zero-sum game is where one person's victory means another person's loss. So it means that when you're splitting a pie in a when you're splitting a pie in a zero-sum way, your gain is my loss, and my gain is your loss. So a typical zero-sum way to split a pie is to just cut it. Either you cut it in half, or you could cut it, at a diagonal, or 2/3, 1/3. So there are different ways of cutting it in a zero-sum way. But there's also a non-zero-sum way of cutting a pie, and that is by discussing with each other. The two individuals may discover that one of them is only interested in the crust and the other is only interested in the stuffing. And so both of them can actually get 100% of what they want. So that's a classic non-zero-sum way of splitting a pie. So how is this similar to the VC entrepreneur game? Now, in the case of a company, you don't have crust and stuffing. What you have is economics and control. And it turns out that just like two individuals can have different preferences regarding the pie, you could also have different preferences with respect to economics and control. Now, I just want to mention that even if it's the case that one of them is not purely interested in, say, the crust or economics, and the other one is not purely interested in, the stuffing or control, it can still be carved in a non-zero-sum way. In other words, it doesn't have to be pure preferences. You could simply have even a mild preference for one over the other. You can end up with a non-zero-sum result, meaning that I don't have to give up everything for you to gain, and vice versa. So understanding the preferences of the entrepreneur versus the VC is very, very important. So let's talk about that for a moment. Entrepreneurs typically are looking for the right amount of funding with the least equity sharing and the least loss of control, plus maybe help with customers, maybe some help with legitimacy, and maybe some advice. So that's what entrepreneurs are looking for. That's their preference. VCs, on the other hand, typically they're looking to pay the right amount for their shares. They're looking to maximize their return on investment with the lowest amount of risk, and they want to exit on schedule. So the preferences of entrepreneurs and VCs are really quite different, and that's a good thing, because that means that we can end up with a non-zero-sum result. Everyone can get maybe not 100% of what they want, but maybe most of what they want. And so the importance of creativity is highlighted here, because let's take the example of the pie. When you're cutting the pie down the middle, that doesn't require a lot of creativity. That's a zero-sum approach. But to carve it in a way where one person gets say the crust and the other person gets the stuffing, that takes more skill. That takes more creativity, and that's very true in the case of the VC entrepreneur game. So creativity is important, and the term sheet is at the heart of it. The term sheet is the tool by which you're going to do the carving. So let's take a look at overview of terms commonly found in the term sheet, and let's look at them in terms of control versus economics. So control issues include co-sale tag-along rights, drag-along rights, pre-emptive rights, board members, information rights, and economic issues include liquidation preferences, types of participation, pre-money valuation, redemption, and anti-dilution. So these are just some examples. Now there are many clauses in a term sheet. I'm only going to highlight some of them just to give you a flavor of the economics versus control issue. Okay, so co-sale rights, they're also called tag-along rights, protect a minority shareholder. Okay, that's the key thing. And these rights give minority shareholders the right to join a majority of shareholders in any sale of the company. Because if you're, say, a minority shareholder, let's say you're a venture capital investor, you might be worried that what if the company is sold, but my 10% stake or my 20% stake is still stuck in the company, and when that happens, I may never have an opportunity to sell my shares. So I want to be able to join the majority shareholders when they exit. So I want that right to tag along. So any sale of the company will include my shares. Drag-along rights are kind of the opposite. They enable the majority shareholders collectively to drag the minority shareholders along in the sale of the company. So in this situation, the minority shareholder would get the same price, terms, and conditions as any other seller. And what is the rationale for this? Well, some buyers of the company will only buy the company if they can buy 100% of it. And this is to prevent a small shareholder from blocking such a sale of the company to such a buyer. Now this can be a major bone of contention during term sheet negotiation because there are situations where say the founder of the company, he may have less than 50% stake in the company. He may not want to ever exit the company, and this clause would make it possible for him to be essentially forced to sell, forced to exit the company, something that he may not want to do. So this can be a major bone of contention. Usually you would not see this kind of clause, which is kind of onerous, in an early stage company, a Series A preferred share, for example. So early on in the life of a company, you would not expect to see a venture capital firm insist on something like this. But because exit may be a long way away, and so this may not be such an issue. But as the company matures and investors are looking to exit, and when it's also possible that when investors may have more leverage, then you might see this kind of clause. Okay, preemptive rights. These enable some shareholders to maintain their percentage of shareholding by having the first opportunity to purchase new shares and or purchase shares of other shareholders that are for sale. So this is a fairly standard clause that you'll see in a lot of term sheets. Because investors may want to maintain their level of ownership of the company, because that may have an impact on their level of control. Board members, this is another key control issue that you'll see in the term sheet, and this is also a negotiated issue. All of these terms are negotiated, and it's important to remember that everything is adjustable. If you change one thing in the term sheet, it's not done in isolation. It may be something else that's done in the term sheet to adjust for it in some way. So board members is a critical issue, the number of board members and the process for selecting board members. This can also go into the term sheet as a control issue. Information rights, I won't spend much time on this because this is fairly self-explanatory, but the right to inspect the books, the frequency of audits by a third-party auditor. This can also be stated very clearly in the term sheet and can also be negotiated. Now we're getting into some economic issues, and the liquidation preference is probably the biggest economic issue in a term sheet. Usually, a sophisticated investor, like a VC or private equity investor, would opt for preference shares rather than common shares. Common shares are what founders would own, maybe employees would own, but investors prefer preferred shares. Now, why they call it preferred shares? It actually means that they get preference. The shareholders of the preferred shareholders get preference over common shareholders when it comes to distributions. So when it comes to dividends or liquidation of a company, the company first goes to pay off the preferred shareholders, and then whatever is left over can be shared with other shareholders, the common shareholders. And by a liquidation event, I don't mean that the company is closed. It just means, well, it could be a bankruptcy, but or a wind down, but it could also be simply a merger or an acquisition or a change of control. So it's not that the company ceases to do business in a liquidation event, but there's a change in control or a merger, or it could also be what you would normally think of as a liquidation or a bankruptcy. So the liquidation preference, and there are different levels of liquidation preference. In other words, you could say that first, the preference shares get all their money back, and then money is shared with the common shareholders. Or you could say the preferred shareholders get twice their money back first, and then the money gets shared with everyone. So again, this is a negotiation. The next is the type of participation. Now, when we talked about the preference shares and the common shares, and we said that first the money goes to the preferred shareholders and then it is shared, then the question is, do the preferred shareholders participate in that sharing process afterwards? And that's again a negotiation. In some cases, once the preferred shareholders get their money, they're done. There's no participation. In other cases, even after getting their money back, whatever's left over, they participate in the sharing process. So that's why you have what are called participating versus non-participating preferred shares. Okay, another economic issue that can be negotiated is the pre-money valuation. That means the value of the company before the investment happens. So now how much the company is worth is can be a major bone of contention during the term sheet negotiation, and often that's quite unfortunate, because the truth is this is just one of the things that can be adjusted. In other words, if you change the liquidation preference, that has an impact on the valuation. Or if you change the type of security, that has an impact on valuation. So to take valuation in isolation and not look at other factors in the term sheet is very I would say, short-sighted. So this is a major bone of contention, but it doesn't need to be, because it should be just as flexible as all the other terms in the term sheet. Then you have an issue called redemption. So some of the preferred shares are redeemable. That means they have to be paid back by a certain date, almost like a loan has to be repaid. And the problem with this for entrepreneurs is that this can actually trigger a liquidation event, because if the money is not available to be returned to the shareholders on that date when it is due, then the preferred shareholders could insist that the company be sold, liquidated, and the proceeds given to them. Of course, this is also negotiated. You don't have to agree to this when you're working on a term sheet. But again, it's adjustable, because for the right price per share, you may actually agree to this. Then we come to the issue of anti-dilution. An investor in the current round of financing wants assurance that the next round will not take place at a lower price per share than currently on offer. So this deals with the situation where an investor is worried that, you know, I may be paying too much, and in the next round maybe I can get the same share for a lower price. So why invest now? I can invest in the future at a lower price. So what so there are two types of anti-dilution provisions. One is full ratchet and one is weighted average ratchet. So the full ratchet means that even if one share in the future is sold at a lower price, that will automatically trigger the issuance of more shares to the original investor, essentially free. In other words, if let's say 3 months from now, shares are issued at half the price, well, I'll get twice as many shares. In other words, I'll get whatever I had before, plus I'll get a whole new set of shares equal to in number to the last set of shares, so that it's as if I invested in the second round, which was cheaper. The weighted average approach, what that says is that, okay, it won't be dependent on just whether one share was issued or 2 shares were issued. It will be adjusted according to how large or how much money was raised in that next round. So if hardly any money was raised at that lower valuation, it won't have much impact. But if a lot of money was raised in that future round at a cheaper price, then it'll have more of an impact. So there's a way of there's a formula whereby these additional shares are given on a weighted average basis. Okay, so in conclusion, the concepts in a term sheet are simple. We've just gone through some of them. They're all fairly straightforward. The problem is there are many such issues, and they also interact with each other, and so that interaction can get complicated, and it can also require a lot of creativity. And the other thing to remember is that it requires a lot of skill, negotiation skills, and practice. And unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs deal with a term sheet maybe once or twice or maybe 3 times in their life, whereas an investor, a VC investor or a private equity investor, may be negotiating term sheets once or twice or 3 times a day. And so the extent of experience and skill is very different among entrepreneurs versus investors. And that's where I think having the right advisor can help you if you've not done it before, if you're new to this game, by teaming up with a lawyer who does this every day. That can kind of offset the advantage that the investor often has over the entrepreneur. So that's all I wanted to tell you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right. Thank you, Ranjit. We'll start with the Q&A now. Our first question is from Tej. He asks, around the liquidation preference term, can you share some particular example case to explain what kind of negotiation could take place?
Sure. Well, the first negotiation could be, do you even want any liquidation preference? I mean, although I would say most sophisticated VCs and private equity investors would insist on preference shares, you may be interacting, say, with an angel investor who may not have the same objectives as as a VC. So you may want to start by saying, look, will you accept common shares? That's the first negotiation that you may want to try. If that's not acceptable, you can talk about what kind of preference shares they're looking for. They may say, well, we want, 1x, which means they want 1 times their money before common shareholders can benefit. Or they may say to you, we want 3 times. We want to get 3 times our money back, and then the common shareholders can benefit. And so you can negotiate with them and you may have to give up something else. You may say, look, I can't do 3 times. I can give you 1 time, but I can give you something. I can maybe shave something off the valuation, for example, to make it sweeter for you. Then you could also talk to them. They could say, well, we want to participate even after the liquidation event. We want to, as if we were common shareholders, just like any other common shareholder, we want to participate in the sharing of the proceeds. And you may say, look, we're not so sure. That's not acceptable to us. And again, you may have to sweeten it by saying, well, we'll do something else. We'll give you an extra board seat or something like that. So these are the kinds of issues that come up when negotiating the liquidation preferences.
Hello.
Yes.
Sorry, my net connection had gone. So our next question is from Anuj. He says, what are some common information rights in a term sheet?
Information rights in a term sheet.
Yes.
Um, I mean, it can be anything. You could say, I want to be able to, I mean, this is all part of the negotiation. You can put anything in there. But typically, it would be things like you'd like to see uh, the bank statements of a company, or you'd like to see the accounting records, or the the customer invoices, or you'd like to see unaudited statements or the audited statements. So it varies from company to company. In some cases, a company might say, well, we'll only give you an annual report at the end of the year. Some will say we'll give you a quarterly report. Some will say we will, you have the right to come into our office anytime and look at the books at any time.
Next question is from Kamlesh. He asks, how much does a lawyer typically charge in India?
It really varies very widely. In India, you have some of the most expensive lawyers in the world, and you also have some of the least expensive. So it really varies. You can even if you have a friend who is a lawyer, or one of your partners is a lawyer, uh, then then you may not have to pay at all. So, but they usually charge by the hour. And but let me say this: that even if they charge a lot, I would say it's worth it, because it's like education. People say education is expensive, but if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. So I would not complain too much, especially if you're new to the game.
Our next question is from Rustam. He says, can you please share the typical valuation techniques and negotiation expectations?
Well, I think if you've been to a business school, you've probably seen multiple valuation tools like discounted cash flow, or comparable company, or comparable deals. You look at publicly traded proxies. You could also look at how much it would cost to replicate what the company has done or achieved. But very often it's difficult, and it's kind of like valuing a painting, because there are some companies that don't have revenues, and projections are very dubious, because anyone can project anything they want, because none of us really knows what the future holds, so it's anyone's guess. But when you're valuing, say, a painting, what happens is you often say to yourself, hey, I could buy, a share of this, or I could buy, for X. I could buy, say, 10% of this for X, or I could buy 20% of another painting or another company for Y. Which would I rather have? Because the investor is making trade-offs. He's seeing lots of other companies, and you know, and every investor has different preferences. So one investor may like one particular painting or company more than another. It really varies. And the thing about the private equity or venture capital market you have to remember is that it's not a market like the stock market, because the market doesn't clear. There's no demand and supply curve that meets at a point and is precise. It's a negotiation, and that's the key here, and that's where the term sheet comes in, is that the valuation can be adjusted. In other words, the valuation under a certain set of terms is X. The valuation under another set of terms is Y. You may decide to accept a term sheet which is lower in valuation because the other terms are very attractive. So I wouldn't think of valuation as a number, but as one among many terms of negotiation.
Our next question is from Anurag. He says, please share how pre-money evaluations are done.
That's very similar to the previous question about how do you value, and I think I've pretty much answered it. It's a negotiation. So pre-money valuation is not a number. It's simply one aspect of the term sheet that is negotiated, along with all the other aspects.
Okay. There's another question from Page. He says, is there any sequence or order of terms that may be a danger sign or an alert, at which point one can see the warning signs?
I'm not sure what you mean by danger or warning signs. I guess the way I'm interpreting that question is that, if you receive a term sheet which you feel is not serious or reflects a complete misunderstanding of your company, then I think what you should do is probably talk to the investor and try to understand, what information they are missing that prompted them to give you such a term sheet. There's nothing dangerous about it, because it's just a document that expresses one way of dividing up the economics and control of a company, and that can never be dangerous. That is simply a document that can be negotiated.
Okay. Our next question and the last question for the day is from Kamlesh. He says, a seed or angel investor or an incubator normally expects a 10% at rupees 10 lakh. How negotiable is that?
Yeah, I think everything is negotiable. There's nothing. There is no. There's no standard rule that says it has to be 10%. It could be that by custom, in a particular time and a particular place, people feel that that's normal. But what is normal changes over time, and it also changes from place to place. And there's no reason why you have to accept what is normal. So I would not get stuck on any preconceived notions as to what is reasonable. But you can also talk to your lawyer who's helping you with this, because he would see these things day in and day out, and he can tell you whether this is something he's seen often, and whether it could be negotiated by adjusting some other aspect of the term sheet.
Okay, there's one more question from Ashutosh. He says, what should be the minimum or maximum term in terms of time for investment? Can it be like a non-disclosure agreement?
I'm not sure. Okay, well, a non-disclosure agreement. Usually these are for a few years. Is the question regarding the duration of the validity of the term sheet? I'm not sure I understood the question, but the validity of the term sheet is usually just a fairly short period of time, because it is really just a temporary document. The ultimate, what this is going to lead to, is a shareholders agreement, and that becomes binding. A term sheet is not binding. It only is a kind of a memorandum of understanding. After the term sheet, there will be a process of due diligence and further negotiation, and finally that will lead to a shareholders agreement. So the term sheet is a non-binding document that is very temporary in nature.
All right, Ranjit, that was the last question for the day. Thank you so much for that interesting session. Thank you to all our attendees for participating in the webinar. Please do send in your feedback and suggestions to us at eclub@nenglobal.org. Also, if you found the session interesting, feel free to blog or post about it. The recorded version of the webinar will be available on our website, YouTube channel rather, by end of this week. NEN Entrepreneur Support and Training is conducting a one-day workshop for entrepreneurs on raising fund in partnership with TIE Pune in Pune on June 29th. The details are up on nenonline.tv. Also join us for our next webinar on top 10 things about a term sheet by Mr. Parag Dhol, Managing Director of Investors Capital Advisors, on June 26th at 3 p.m. Thank you once again and have a nice evening. Thank you.